Hi, you're listening to Scribble Talk, a podcast for bid and proposal professionals. My name is Baachu, and I'll be sitting down with the industry leaders to dive deep into the topics that helps you to successfully progress both in your career and also in your business. Today's guest is Angie Wolfe. Angie has been a good friend for well over 10 years for me. And as you know, we already showcased Angie Wolfe in Scribble Talk Stories. If you haven't, please do listen to Angie's podcast in our stories episode. But Angie is CPMP, APMP certified as a creative analytical professional and business owner with 18 plus years of experience. Most importantly, Angie runs her consulting firm, Ideas at Dawn, where she supports large civil engineering construction firms for their competitive advantage with their proposals to win more work without adding more payroll. That's a good one. So in addition to that, she also does proposal management, writing, editing, graphic design, support, and training to meet the increased demands on proposal staff. So if you are in the sector, please do reach out to Angie. Today's topic is 6 steps to a successful proposal. So Angie, first of all, welcome back to Scribble Talk.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back. I'm excited.
Angie, what are these 6 steps to a successful proposal?
They are pretty simple. I haven't come up with a great acronym yet, so we're working through that. But it starts off with strategy. Then we talk about starting up our proposal. So that includes like your kickoff meetings, that sort of thing. Then we go to actually managing the process and managing the proposal, to developing our content, which is that biggest heavy lift I think most of us encounter. To now we have to review the proposal, which about takes just as much time as developing our content. And then we finish it out. So whether that's an interview, whether that's just closing it out and repackaging everything. But those are my 6 steps to developing a proposal that I take my clients through. And that is what and how I encourage people to follow a process every time versus just diving in at, hey, we have a proposal due in 10 days. Let's just throw something together.
Well said there, Angie. I think anything related to steps, always it's useful because it helps us to take, as you rightly said, 1 step at a time. So let's begin with the very first step, strategy. Talk about what do we do here?
Yeah, so when it comes to strategy, this is where I'm not always incredibly involved because it can take so long. So this is your capture planning, your business development. This is when you do a go, no go, a bid, no bid. These really upfront things, getting to know our client, really understanding who they are, making sure that they know who you are. And I always say that this is also can be where you can make or break a proposal potentially and win that job or not. And really understanding who that client is and making sure, right, we can develop a theme, develop some messaging and around what the client needs, but also what we provide. I always say, and this depends with a lot of my clients, is starting at least strategy, getting me involved at least 2 months ahead of time. So 2 months ahead of a proposal coming out, having me get involved with the capture planning, understanding who our client is, but also being a part of, are we having any additional meetings with teaming partners with the client and helping really create that message and branding now versus waiting an additional months. With one of my clients, though, we are doing this way ahead of 2 months. And I find this really more common on the engineering. So civil engineering side of proposals, where we are doing this like 6-8 months and earlier, a year plus ahead of a proposal coming out, in developing this strategy so far ahead of time that before we get to the startup phase, we already have a pink team document. We know enough about the proposal to develop it ahead of time, and have already taken our messaging back to the client to see if it's resonating. So that I would call it be probably the ideal. But if we can do any of this when it comes to capture planning, go, no go, developing a win theme, developing our problem solution outcome evidence guide, or it's also acronym as IFBP, any of those things ahead of time, so we can and even get started on content ahead of time, that will set us up for success. So we aren't doing and taking 10 days or 2 weeks to respond to a proposal. That we really, it is strategic, and it's not just using resources to respond to a proposal because we have them. So it really becomes making the best use of the internal resources, or external for that matter, to set us up for success, and really with the end goal of winning work. Because if we're just doing proposals for practice, I always tell when I was at corporate, I don't need the practice. So if we're doing this for practice, it's not for me. Because I don't need the practice of doing proposals. So really pushing back and with through that go, no go, or bid, no bid process, that and this step is where that's extra critical, in communicating that we don't need the practice. So if they're doing it for practice, for your estimator's point of view, at least you know the level of effort, and that really helps with this identifying that in the strategy phase.
Thank you so much, Angie. That was a very comprehensive explanation. So again, yes, I think before you bid, have a strategy in place. It's easy to say, but most of the time we just end up just running as soon as we get it. So primarily now the strategy is in place, and we have got right people allocated to a certain extent to this. We move into the next phase, which is the startup. Talk us through what does this phase does.
Yeah, startup is as it sounds. So this is for me where you start off with your, prepping for that kickoff meeting. So your proposal at this point is out. Strategy is everything. I call it pre-RFP or pre-SOQ or pre-whatever you're doing from a submission perspective. And startup is you have something in hand, and now it's go time. It is a T-minus something day, right? The countdown has started. So this is, when you have your kickoff meeting and developing a proposal schedule and a responsibility matrix and a compliance matrix and a style guide, when you are making assignments and delegating work, and hopefully you're delegating work, if not to other people on a team, at least to some SMEs to get some content and helping with that. This is also unique to engineering and construction. It's when also we start the pricing exercise. So not only are we kicking off a proposal, but we're also kicking off the pricing side. So that this is when the estimate starts kicking off as well. And when we start to hone in on what our solution is, and really just setting ourselves up for success, putting in that early upfront work, getting buy-in from everybody when it comes to the kickoff meeting and the schedule and the assignments. So you get that buy-in, on T-minus 30. And so when you're coming up to developing your content in your first review, whether it's pink team or red team, depending on your timeline, that people actually are responding to you. that you're getting that content, that you're getting those graphics, that that you have considered the estimate schedule when it comes to your reviews, so you aren't getting the solution in details, 5 days before it's due. That you are getting things ahead enough or early enough in the schedule that modifications can be made. So this is a critical time to be collaborating with our SMEs and our proposal leadership. Usually I work with leadership on the design and estimate side, and we are a team that's going after the pursuit. It is not just me as a proposal manager. There's lots of us all going after this win together from a leadership perspective. And this is that time to align our schedules, to align our strategy, and making sure we're one. And the proposal is one component of that, and making sure people understand the importance. I usually don't have to sell that part anymore. I am fortunate enough with my clients and the industry I work in that most people understand why we're doing the proposal and the value and importance it is. But I know there are others in AEC, but also in other global proposal industry that still have to communicate the value that they're bringing in the startup phase, and communicate the importance of doing a kickoff meeting and doing a schedule and communicating these things. So next to strategy, if you don't do strategy, startup has to get done. Otherwise, you will set yourself up for some long days and long nights, or just doing a mediocre job, which doesn't get a win. When it comes to setting yourself up for not only leveling up your skills as a proposal person and your authority, but also the goal is to win work. And if we aren't doing this to win work, then why are we doing it?
Well said there, Angie. I think I think there's nothing much for me to ask. It's very, very, I think once you rightly said, once you got the green light, what do you do? I think, yes, we all know this, but how often or how consistent are we doing this to every bit is something that we need to do, think, reflect wherever possible. So now we have made the go ahead, we have started it, and we are moving into scheduling the proposal in your management phase. Talk us through about that as well, please, Angie.
Yeah, management is just as important as any other phase, because this is where, as it says, you are managing the process. So there's not lots of tools or milestones during this step, but it is because it really overlaps all the other steps. But this is where, whether you're going to do, and this is when you decide during the startup phase, but how are you going to manage the proposal? Are you going to do this through daily meetings? And I call them daily stand-up. So taking this concept from our technology sector and doing stand-up meetings. It's also a little bit of, I also call them play of the day, which comes from the construction field. So using terminology from your industry to get people behind a meeting, a concept, is something that we have used. So play of the day is in the construction field, what they do every morning to set the people up for success. Like, here's what we're going to do for the day, and they call it play of the day. The stand-up meeting really comes from, I've used it in the technology side. And so depending on which industry you're in, labeling these meetings, something that is relevant to your industry makes a lot of sense, especially if you're getting others from have to incorporate your SMEs into these processes. So what these meetings are is, whether you do them daily, whether you do them weekly, whatever that looks like, or every other day, some sort of cadence. But it is an opportunity to check in with those developing your content and graphics. And why they're called in the concept of play the day or even stand up is that they're meant to be short. Is that, you know, they're meant to be 15-minute long meetings. They're not meant to solve all the problems and do everything. They are really just meant to give you as the proposal manager, proposal team, an update of everything that's going on. So really the structure that I use is, and it's also a way depending on how involved you are and what your role as a proposal manager with your owner. So I started off with like, what news do we have about the owner or from the client? Do we have new addendums? What does this look like? Are we expecting one? Q&A, what does that look like? And then also similar to that, what news do we have about our competition? Is there something going on? Did they, you know, set up a DBE meeting or some sort of public meeting? Like, what do we know about the competition? Who is bidding it? Who isn't? Are they teaming together? So starting off our meeting with that information, to then doing a high level status update of each of the sections. So it is not going into the weeds, like here's sections 1 through 5. What are the updates? And there's, you know, that overall owner for each section that you determine during your startup phase and during that kickoff meeting. And they are the ones responsible for providing those updates. And really the goal is understanding what is blocking, right? What is a roadblock for them that they can't resolve something, and then helping them identify, and you're not going to solve it at this meeting. It's just, you know, what are those next steps that that needs to happen for them to move forward. So whether that's, I need you to review this, I need this person to review that, or we're waiting from the client on this direction, we're waiting. So really, you know, what's that status update? So you do that for every section, major section. You're not going down into the weeds. You look at any open action items from previous meetings, both play the day stand-up meetings or other meetings as well as a proposal team, and then look at what meetings are scheduled in the next 24 hours or the next time you meet. So an example of this would be like on a design build project, where you might have task force meetings, or you might have meetings with the client. And so, you know, identifying and giving everybody, here's what's happening the next day or 2 or 3. So everyone knows what's going on and really can make sure that we are all going in the same direction. I like to do these calls on the phone or in person or over video. There are tools where you can also do this via email. I don't find it as useful just because of getting people to read their email, but there are different ways to implement like a status update via email or doing a little bit of both. But that's really what the management piece is. It's how you are going to manage and enforce your schedule, which is always the key thing, and keeping people focused on the end goal through this management phase.
That's amazing, Angie. I think, totally, even before you begin, you need to have a robust structure, robust principles of how the whole thing is going to work. And management is where you lay these practices and approach. That's once we have the practice and approach, then we get into building, developing content, and to make it glossy, then add graphics and other things. Talk us through the next stage, Angie, the content phase.
Content is where all the action happens, I say. For me, I break it into 5 buckets. So is it not only the words, it's also the graphics. So it's how are you going to develop your content and organize it through outlining and developing those words to, for me, I like interviewing the SMEs. I don't always, and this is more unique to construction. My engineering friends, civil engineering friends, like to develop words and like to develop the content on the page, but I have to give them some pretty strict parameters. So, but I like to interview them, or at least, you know, give them a draft and work through that process with them. I just don't hand things over. To developing the actual words on a page. And this is how I've been, oh goodness, I won't say forever because that's a pretty long time, but developing the actual content and not, so using our previous proposals, using go-bys, using boilerplate content to develop the sections. And that, you know, that's from your cover letter, executive summary, projects, resumes, you name it, approach, going through all of those things, which is why our content really starts during that startup phase when we have developed our outline and we've given our SMEs content to start from. And that's one of the important reasons why to do that startup phase is you've given them all of those steps to be successful during your kickoff meeting or soon afterwards. And then as coming with that startup phase, and sometimes as part of this phase, depending on how extensive your proposal is, you know, developing that storyboard or outline or whatever you want to call it. So you can also start on those graphics. So graphics in my world can be very technical, from 2D graphics to 3D graphics, that it takes time to do them. And it's not something that happens in 15 minutes, that it really can take a day or longer, depending on if it's a 2D or 3D and what that looks like. So it's all, I call it all the good stuff of the content phase, but it really is, but it starts with that startup phase and in creating those outlines and schedule and evaluation criteria and everything, right? Your win themes and incorporating that into the content. So, which is why step 4 is so important, because it's taken everything you've done, really 1 and 2, and now you're putting it together. Now, will it really go together? And reinforcing your value proposition. So that's why step 4 is so important. But it's also why it takes the longest. But more important that it setting yourself up for success, developing your content and early in the process.
Nice. As you rightly said, content is where the action happens, and this is where it makes or breaks for companies. So now we have got a content or some content in it. It could be good content, best content, or it could be a content. But either way, through reviews is where we kind of understand how far have you got, what's the best thing that we have done, etc. And there are lots of different reviews. Talk us through about what are the different reviews that you suggest and what should be included, and a quick run through of the benefits of each stages.
Yeah. So let's start off with, let's have a review, period. I've talked to enough people recently who are in the, I have less than 10 days, I don't even do a review. I can't get anybody to review them. So let's if you're in that boat, let's restart and set a structure. For me, reviews are the minimum. Along with the kickoff meeting, you need to have at least a review and a kickoff meeting. Because if you aren't getting that buy-in in as a proposal person, if you are developing this in a vacuum, you don't need to practice. And you need to learn to push back. And in using our industry resources, whether it's a training like mine or someone else's, there are plenty out there that there's a formal process that you should follow. And yes, the change management is going to be difficult, but it is critically important to do this and at least include 1 review. The reviews that I use, and I've added one on from working with these civil engineering firms, but you know, at minimum, usually like a red and gold review. So red for me is around a 90% complete. And this is I would call it the technical proposal. I don't deal anything with price besides if there's something to do with price or making sure it's in the right forms or format, potentially narrative if that's required. But otherwise I take price out of it. For me, the price is part of the estimate or something else, and that has a separate review process and a separate team. So when I talk reviews, I am usually focused specifically on just the technical proposal in submission. So if there's enough time, so more than 4 weeks, more than 4 weeks. So usually 5-6 weeks, I will do 3 reviews minimum. So that's a pink team, which for me is like 20, it varies. Some sections are 50%, some are only 25. Your 25 are usually anything related to the technical approach or our actual solution. Our projects, resumes, more boilerplate content is usually around the 50%. So for me, I always also love getting it in the format of what it's going to look like sooner than later. I'm very visual from that perspective, and if I can't tell accurately how long my document's going to be or what it's going to look like, I struggle. So I'm always one to put it in a final format sooner than later and deal with the quote unquote repercussions afterwards. That means, pulling it out of InDesign or letting people mess with it in Word, whatever that looks like. I do deal with that later, but that's what Pink Team is for me. This will be the one review that if we are in a shorter duration, so a 4-week turnaround or shorter, I will drop a Pink Team. So we aren't doing back-to-back-to-back reviews, because usually I will spread them out about a week or so apart, if not more. I prefer a week to 10 days to 2 weeks, depending on what that duration looks like. Another unique thing about the reviews is that if it's a longer proposal and a longer bid cycle, and if we have 3 months, we will break out our technical content from our non-technical content and do separate reviews. Because our non-technical content, projects, resumes, like quality, safety, some of that project management piece that is more boilerplate and not dependent on our technical solution, doing those things or doing that review separately ahead of time gets us going while they're still developing our solution. So we can still continue the proposal process and not wait till the end and have a lot more things to do when we're a month or a month and a half from the due date. So breaking those up into 2 reviews is another thing I recommend. So this terminology applies whether it is a technical review, quote unquote, or non-technical, or if it's a combined. So after your pink team, which to me can be optional, is a red team. Red team for me is 90%. So it has graphics. It is close to page count. Sometimes it won't be. So we will call it a different color, like it's a pinkish red or some other color. And really being explicit with what I think that percentage is, because each company is different. So you need to make sure you define what these are in your firm. As a consultant, I let people know, here's my definition of what these are, and making sure you communicate that, because everyone has different opinions. And then after red team, which depending on the length of pursuit, it's usually 2 weeks before the due date. It sometimes can be a month if it's a more complicated or bigger production effort or whatever that looks like. So usually a month to 2 weeks before it's due. Then a gold team. This is when you are looking at fatal flaws. This is when also you will do the final check for your technical solution. So whether that's your construction solution, engineering, whatever that looks like, everything needs to be in there, and it needs to be accurate at the gold team. Red team is usually when we'll get some changes and it won't be necessarily accurate or 100%. But gold team means to only be fatal flaws, you're at page count. It is ready to be blessed and ready to be submitted. I always tell my people that with gold team, it should be, if we had to submit it the next day, we could. So there is nothing, it is compliant. It might not be 100% compelling, but it is comprehensive and it is accurate. And that's really for me, the gold team. After gold, it's not a review, but it's always the final flip of it is a day before it's going to be done or day before production. And you, a estimate or pricing person, and then the overall pursuit or project lead are doing that final look. So not a formal review, but is that final look of here's everything that we've incorporated from the gold team, and we are going to submit it. And here's your final chance to make any changes. Usually there aren't any, but that is, the craziness of the review cycle, which is why the review cycle and content development overlap so much and take up so much time because of these, which is why we will modify, take some, add some in. If we get extensions, we'll add another review. Take one away, but there is at least one review to review all the content, and that is the most critical thing.
Thank you, Angie. Again, you know what, detailing different reviews, as you rightly said, depending on your time scales, just pick your reviews. But when you do the reviews, ensure that the reviews are done for specific purposes, as you rightly said, for pink, red, and gold, and ensure that any changes are being done. And again, you just nailed it. Again, that is. And we can talk about this in length, but it's a good summary of different reviews and what we can do here. At last, now everything is done and we are nearing closure here, and we actually submitted the bid. People talk about lessons learned. Is there anything on the closeout stage, which is the last stage that we need?
No, the other big thing with closeout, lessons learned both internally with your partners. So if you have other sub-consultants or JV joint venture partners, making sure to include them. This is also when you're doing your production and delivery, which I always say this part also starts on day one. This starts at the kickoff phase. So you are planning for this way ahead of time. And this is also when, as part of the closeout, I also wrap in, sometimes you have that owner interview. So if you have an owner interview, that'll come ahead of your closeout. But you still need to close out the proposal. Yeah, there are different deliverables and different schedules, but making sure you package it and you really finish one or have someone help you finish one before you start the other. It's always a good break too, mental break, before you officially close everything out. But not only in back to debriefs, Bhaskar, but also our owner debriefs, making sure that we are requesting that from our clients, but also doing it internally. So lots of things here is sometimes is the step that we forget to do and don't want to do because we're already on the next proposal and the next project, but is where we can set ourselves up for success with that next one and lessons learned.
Great, Angie. I think, you know what, this is a good comprehensive overview. You all seems to know, yes, you need to have a strategy. Yes, when the bid starts in, get a no bid thing, and the startup. Then we get on with, okay, now you've got it, build your bidder comparison matrix, your proposal schedules and stuff, your management content, get on with it and pull the relevant content that's going to help you to win. How we are going to actually check that through your reviews, through pink, red, and gold, finally the closeout. Beautifully said here, Angie. Thank you so much. Is there any part or the final words from you, Angie, before we close this? And I'm sure you also train people who are not aware of these processes as well, right? Talk us through about that, plus any other closure points.
Yeah. So I do it's a full day training. So an 8-hour training to take what we just talked about the last 30 minutes and taking you through those steps. I have it specific and unique to the engineering and construction space, but it's proposals in general. I have some unique facets related to those in the pricing component, but yeah, training someone on that. The other unique thing is I don't just leave you, call it high and dry. I don't just word vomit at you for 8 hours and then say goodbye, good luck. As part of my training, you get 3 months of weekly one-on-one mentoring with me and my team to help implement these 6 steps in your firm and on a specific proposal. That's always the challenge of sometimes we don't go over everything. So I have tools and templates to help you with all of these steps to help change the process within your firm and to help guide you through that. So if you don't have a formal process, just do something like set up a structure and go with it. Don't be I was on a webinar last week and I had several people mention how they get 10 or less days to do proposals and it's a fire drill. And you have to start valuing your time and helping your company leadership that in order to win work, in order to win more proposals, there needs to be a more formal structure to this process. Otherwise, you're treating yourself as more administrative. Finally made progress within corporate in changing that opinion. So encouraging, it's possible. You just have to really believe in yourself and believe in a process and stick with it. And know that there's people in the industry behind you saying there's a structure, there's a process, use it, and that having 10 days to respond to a proposal really isn't ideal.
Well said there, Angie. Again, you know what? Yes, you know what? You might be thinking, yeah, I'm familiar with this, but every now and then we do need to listen to the basics or what's common, because that's where we make most mistakes. So hopefully this inspired a lot of people to revisit and say, okay, maybe there is 1 or 2 things that I could tweak it in the 6 steps. If you need any further guidance, obviously Angie will be good to help. We'll also add the links part of this episode. But thank you, Angie, as always, for joining and sharing. Wish you, your family, all the good health and happiness. And I'll speak to you very soon, Angie. Take good care.
Awesome. Thank you.
To our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. Please visit bachuscribble.com/podcast to listen to this episode and check out any of our other previously recorded episodes. If you've enjoyed today's interview, don't forget to subscribe, review, and share the Scribble Talk podcast. We hope you'll check out our next episode where we interview another industry expert and special guest. Until then, it's Ashley Kays,
Bhaskar Sundram,
signing off.